You're listening to Navigating the French on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content and a bonus episode of Navigating the French, please join us on Patreon.
Hello, and welcome to Navigating the French, the podcast where each episode we take a look at a French word and try and see what it tells us about French culture. I'm your host, Emily Monaco. Today I'm joined by Kasia Dietz, a travel journalist and bag designer in the capital of fashion. She's here to discuss a word that might make you think of ice cream, but in reality is inextricably linked to the French way of presenting oneself, like a work of art. Mode. So I'm super excited to welcome you, Kasia, to the podcast. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do here in Paris?
Yes, hello. My name's Kasia Dietz. So I'm originally from New York, and I've been in Paris 14 years now, which seems like it has flown by. It's been an interesting 14 years, and I'm really grateful to be here. And when I first arrived, I couldn't find work, so I launched a handbag business. So I designed namesake handbags, which is one of my great passion projects, is designing sort of wearable art. So I've been doing that for a long time, and that led me to bag workshops, which are hand-painted bags where people can create their own bags. And then I added fashion tours because I started blogging when I got here, like many people who needed to sort of create a new presence in a foreign land. And the blog, got a lot of attention. And then I started writing some guest posts for different blogs and different media and websites. And that led me really to fulfilling one of my greatest dreams, which was to be a travel writer, travel and lifestyle. And this all connects back to the fashion that I started initially when I arrived to Paris, because I do write a lot about fashion and, all connected to travel, of course. And when I started researching for some of these articles I was working on, I got to meet designers and I dug a bit deeper into the French landscape in terms of fashion and really found some talent out there and thought, okay, I want to highlight this talent. I want people to discover them. And of course, in my writing, they can. But then I'm like, I want them to actually meet them, to actually see their work, to see what they're creating, to be able to have this unique experience in the fashion capital, which is obviously, a lot about Paris is fashion, as we all know. And it's much more than, Chanel and Dior and Saint Laurent. It's these small designers that are creating really bespoke pieces, and they're made in Paris. Like their ateliers are, one of them is using my atelier. In fact, that's how I met her. So I kept seeing, some of her work leaving the atelier and thinking, this is amazing. Like, where is this going? How can I find it? And I have great stories about how I met all the designers, but I'll save those for another day. But I put these tours together. Each one is very custom and catered towards the clientele. But these designers can dress anyone basically. And the beauty is that you actually meet the designer and you can have custom pieces created. So it's really a unique experience that I think fits so well Paris, because this is where so much of fashion originated. And what we consider now fashion is, a lot of it comes from Paris. It was started here in France.
Well, let's dig right back into that because, we're going to talk a little bit about the sort of linguistic terms down the line, but I think Paris is so synonymous with fashion. And I'm curious, because of your approach and because of how long you've been here, but I know you also travel quite a bit and you have a very international lifestyle and international sort of influences in your life. How do you think Parisian fashion stands out as compared to other fashion capitals around the world, like Rome or London or Tokyo or, our hometown of New York? What makes Parisian fashion so Parisian and so unique?
People look at Paris and they think there's this way of being that's very Parisian, the look, the style, the French girl. Like there's this definite idea of how Parisian fashion is, how it looks and how it's styled. And I think we need to look at history really for why this is. So the history of French fashion is super interesting. And I think this is why, on a global scale, France is always admired for its fashion, and the women are looked up to for their sensibility in how they put looks together and in how they appear to the world. They always seem put together, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So, and each neighborhood is very indicative as well of different looks, which I like about Paris. But speaking to the history of French fashion, so what's super interesting is it's actually the French who were the first to make an industry out of fashion. So it wasn't just, making dresses and having ladies come to their atelier and getting them dressed. They were actually, since the 17th century, they were really creating what is known to be fashion. Like they were styling, women that would come into these elegant spaces, and they were creating the actual sketches. Like it's in France that sketches were invented to design clothing. Like they created what we look at now as patterns. I guess the patterns, for different clothing, like all of this really started in France. So it's actually Louis XIV who we owe a lot to, the Sun King, who brought the luxury goods business to France, basically. He was interested in a lot of beauty, and he loved his wigs, as apparently he was balding, so he needed to do something to bring a sense of beauty to himself and overcompensate for his lack of hair. And of course, the court followed suit. And, we also are responsible here in France for creating the fashion press in the 1670s and different fashion seasons. So like now, now we have the winter, fall, spring, summer, all of that. The changing of styles is also something that started here in France. Also, what I think is probably the most interesting are department stores were really took off here in Paris, with the Bon Marché Rive Gauche was the first one, which actually opened in I think it was 1852. So this is the first department store in the world. So it's pretty
Wow.
impressive. Yeah. So if you go there, there's so much history, and there's just, it's fascinating. And then of course, Printemps and Galeries Lafayette are beautiful, and those have their own unique histories. And, all of this really contributes to making Paris a fashion capital, and in my opinion, the fashion capital. Because if you look at the courtiers of the old days, we have actually a British man, funny enough, named Charles Frederick Worth. He was the first one to be considered a proper designer and not just a dressmaker. So he invented the fashion show, the fashion label as a status symbol, which obviously people come here to go to Chanel and to go to Saint Laurent and all the beautiful shops that are status symbols. And this is where it all started. So where better to shop than in Paris with the French labels, right? And so there's just so much happened here. I mean, fashion houses were founded. Women were liberated from the corsets that were worn. And the creativity really flourished in Paris, and then you have Coco Chanel, who really revolutionized the fashion world here. And, Christian Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, like we have so many really impressive designers that originated in Paris and even flocked to Paris who were not French. I mean, you had designers like Karl Lagerfeld for Chanel. People were just so attracted to Paris for its elegance and timelessness, and yet its freedom of expression, where you could wear different accessories, you could really highlight pieces and stand out by looking glamorous, but yet, this is how people dressed every day. I mean, this is not obviously how we dress these days, but there was definitely a sense of freedom and, of course, and playfulness in the dress while keeping it classy and not too revealing, which is something very important to note, because Parisians, even now, the dress code, I mean, there isn't really a dress code, but they never show too much, which is what I love. Like you'll never see a woman looking like, she's just wearing like a bandeau. I mean, you'll see like some leg or you'll see some cleavage, they'll reveal a little bit, but there's always something left to the imagination, or you'll have a nice scarf and a heel with a mini skirt, but you'll have a trench covering that. So there's just a level of class that I find you don't see you'll see it in Rome and you'll see it in Milan for sure, but it's just so indicative of French fashion.
So I'm super excited to delve more into this with you, as well as we look at sort of what past expectations and modern expectations of Parisian women are like. And I think this is a really good time for me to get a little bit nerdy, because I started this podcast because I love language. And, what interested me and what we're talking about today is this idea of la mode, which is the French word for fashion. And la mode is just a translation of the way. So when we say like à la mode, we mean in the way. And then usually in France, it'd be followed by de. So like when we have à la mode used in culinary use, for example, you'd say like tripe à la mode de Caen, which is tripe in the way of Caen. But when we just say la mode, it means fashion. And in the French word façon, which is a sort of loose synonym of mode, is what actually gave us the English translation fashion. But now we're seeing the word fashion being borrowed back from English into French, and people saying things like, ah oui, c'est très fashion. So I'm really curious from your perspective, being in this world, as a jumping off point to talk a little bit about sort of how contemporary French fashion looks. What's your intuition of the difference between when we say la mode in French and fashion in English? And then again, when we say fashion in French, what does that mean?
Well, the French loved to pop in an English word here and there, right? Which is funny because they're like, I do not speak English, but they love their English words. So definitely the words are interconnected. I mean, la mode and fashion. I mean, there's such a crossover. And, when you think about what fashion really means, it's a mode of doing something. It's a manner of doing something, right? So it's the latest style of behavior or of clothing, they're really just so similar in many ways and can be interchanged. And they're a manner and a form and a way of life. And it always comes back to fashion, like the fashion of something. It doesn't necessarily even have to be clothing. It can be the way you fashion your room, or it can be really interchanged. And it's interesting that it's true what you said, how it was a French word brought into English and now returned to France. And I think we see that a lot, actually, so I'm not so surprised that they use it.
Yeah, we do a lot, but I always feel like when it gets borrowed back, it takes on like a little extra meaning. Like there's a reason why some French people will say something is fashion instead of saying it's à la mode. Like it means something slightly different, it seems.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stronger way of, like, they're trying to say like, this is like the creme de la creme. Like this is really the top of fashion right now. What they're saying is this is like cutting edge, or this is like the coolest.
Yeah. And that I think kind of feeds back into what you were saying about the timelessness of French fashion versus this like avant-garde kind of more out there fashion you might see in New York or London. Like maybe, and I'm just throwing it out there because I'm anything but fashionable. I mean, is there an argument, do you think, in favor of people saying something is fashion when they think it's a little Anglo influenced and a little more out there and a little more like maximalist?
I don't know that the French would like to credit anyone else for fashion, to be honest.
Fair enough.
I think that, they'll look at other brands, of course, and, like you have, it's crazy. I was recently at Golden Goose, this luxury sneaker shop that's Italian, and it's all the rage everywhere in the world, even in France and Paris as well. It's like the people are going crazy for it. So, of course, they have their brands, their luxury brands, or their independent brands, hopefully, that I support, that they can credit to fashion as well. But I think the typical Parisian girl, or there's no real, can we say typical Parisian girl, but Parisian girls that we meet on the streets in Paris, I think they will definitely credit fashion to what they consider French, like what they grew up to know as fashion, the icons that they grew up, with Jane Birkin, with Vanessa Paradis. There's so many, gorgeous, like Brigitte Bardot and Catherine Deneuve, like these ladies who really, really represent Parisian and French fashion. I think that's who they'll credit like fashion, you know.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you may enjoy our sister podcast, City of Muses. Each week, join City of Muses host Jennifer Garrity as she sits down with contemporary artists, dancers, and performers to explore what inspires them, where their ideas come from, and how Paris has helped or hindered their dreams come true. Inspiration and creativity meet in Paris, the City of Muses. Check out City of Muses now, available wherever you listen to podcasts. Navigating the French will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Navigating the French. Well, then let's get into that sort of idea, because I think there's this image we have of the Parisienne, and you alluded a little bit to this idea that La Parisienne, as we discussed with your friend and mine, Lindsay Termuda, on the podcast, La Parisienne is a bit of a myth, but there is some truth to it. And there is a very Parisienne look when we're talking about Parisian fashion. So I was wondering, just off the top of your head, you mentioned one that might come up again, but if you had to pick three sort of staples that exemplify contemporary Parisian fashion, what would they be?
So as you can see often walking around the streets, which is the streets are themselves a fashion show for anyone coming to Paris. And I can definitely say more so than Emily in Paris, for example, as we all, enjoy the show to different degrees. I think it's totally harmless and I'm not against it at all. I actually think it's fun. It's definitely not indicative of French fashion or Parisian fashion. What she wears it pops, it's nice. It pops, the colors pop. It works for what it is. Sylvie, her boss, if anyone's seen the show, I think is much more representative of a Parisian woman in the way she dresses and carries herself. So, that being said, the sort of staples, which Emily probably does not have in her closet, scarves for sure, which have always been a staple, but I feel like now they're being worn in different ways, in playful ways. They're being wrapped around bags, around crossbody bags. They're used in the hair. They're used to accent in different ways, really. It's a lot of fun. A scarf is just so practical for many, many different things. And it adds a little color, like when I tend to wear my blacks and my navy blues, and I like a little pop of color, so I'll take a scarf. And I think that's a very Parisian accent. And scarves are something also that you pass down through generations. Like your grandmother will give you a beautiful Hermes scarf that maybe her mother gave her. And this is something that will stay in the family and that you'll wear, and you'll think of this lovely woman in your life. And so, things like that, like a Chanel bag, for example, you see many Parisian women with Chanel bags. And I think, and often they were given to them, through their family or passed down, or maybe they did splurge and buy one. Okay, great. Or buy a vintage one, which I'm a big advocate for vintage as well. So you see a lot of accessories like that I feel like are really staples. And back to the bags, like a crossbody, a really classic crossbody, whether it's a Chanel or whether it's Celine or whether it's something that, another brand, there's so many great French brands. You'll find a woman wearing more basic clothing and maybe a really gorgeous accessory to tie it all together with her white sneakers or with her ballerinas or with her, whatever boots she has or whatever shoes. So, there's accent pieces, and that's a very, very, very much part of the French formula, the Parisian formula. And I love that because as somebody who tries not to buy too many things and really values what I do have, and my motto on that topic also is to collect versus just to consume. And I think that's a very Parisian way of looking at fashion, is during the sales, the sold that we have twice a year here in France, women will buy a few pieces to add to their wardrobe. So you keep collecting. It's not just, oh, I need a new outfit. I need something to wear. I have nothing to wear tonight. They mix and match. So you'll take something from another season and wear it with something new that you just got. And it's not about trends necessarily. It's not trend driven. It's more things that flatter you. This is something that I really believe people maybe don't understand so much about Parisian style is that it's not just about what the latest look is, it's about what looks good for you and adjusting yourself into, a little bit of what's trendy, of course, like the oversized blazers, pajama chic was a look for a while, wearing things that you could potentially wear to bed, but you're obviously going out, and a blazer is another staple that I would say is definitely a part of every Parisian's wardrobe, including my own. I have a few really strong blazers that I'll wear often with many different things. And it's just, having these basics that you could then wear with something you bought, some less expensive clothing or some more, a piece that maybe you'll tire of soon. And you just have these pieces that really remain in your closet that you have collected. Because that's, again, I can't stress this enough that to me, fashion, it's sort of like collecting art. Like you're collecting pieces, you're collecting pieces that you're going to want to wear for decades, or hopefully they'll last for that long. That's why I'm all about the smaller designers, better made pieces. I no longer go to any fast fashion shops. I've given that up years ago. And I really focus on local and good quality. Even when I travel, I'll search out small designers and artisans, and maybe I won't get to meet them, but I'll look for what they're creating and try to add that to my collection. And it actually makes shopping a lot more fun, and it's easier because I'm not distracted by all the trends that are luring people into the shops. Because who wants to look like everyone else? Like that's also, my motto. Like, why would I want to look like everyone? Like we're all so different, and we all should celebrate our uniqueness and our unique beauty and our unique figures and our unique strengths in the way we look.
And I love what you said about fashion being art, and also about this idea that, in France, you're often going to see people finding the piece that suits them. And I remember one of the first shopping experiences I ever had in Paris, as I think I was 16 or 17 years old. And I'm a millennial. I grew up in a very unfortunate fashion time for pear-shaped folks like myself, where, there were a lot of flounces and a lot of low-rise jeans. And, you're forcing yourself into these fashions that aren't doing you necessarily any favors. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's just because it's not the right clothing for you. And I remember walking into a shop in Paris. I don't even know if it still exists, but it was called Les Filles à la Vanille. And it was all these sort of very lacy, like crazy kind of avant-garde dresses. And I put something on, and the woman looked at me and she said, "Ah, non, madame, you don't have enough boob for that." And I was like, oh, like no one had ever said anything like that to me before, but she wasn't criticizing my body. She reached for the rack and she got me a different, similar dress with a different top. And she was like, "This one's for you." And I'd never had that before, but it feels so Parisian to be that blunt, but then also to put you at ease with something that's going to actually make you feel good.
Yeah. And I think this is what leads to confidence, not just for Parisian or French women, but for all women. I mean, we should feel good in what we wear. And this is during my tours. I say, look, we're not here to shop, spend your money. We want you to, to collect pieces that you're going to love, that you're going to can't wait to wear and that feel good. And getting dressed, whether it's me that helps them or the designer, which can look at your figure right away and say, "Oh, try this." And they were like, "Well, I would never wear this." But after they put it on, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so good in this." So exactly what you said, like, this is what I think Parisian women, this is a strength here because they dress to look and feel good, not just to look like a magazine cover or whatever's cool that month or that season. Like if low rise just doesn't work for you, don't wear them. Like who cares if everyone's wearing them and they're like the latest, craze on Instagram? Like who cares? And I guess I never really subscribed to that. So for me, it's easy to say. And some people need to be told what to wear. So they go to these influencers and they order whatever they're wearing, but it doesn't fit your figure. So step back and think, okay, what do I feel good in? What do I feel good in? What looks good on me? And what am I excited to wear? Like you want to decorate your body with things that make you happy and make you feel good.
Yeah.
So this is the whole point of fashion to me.
Of course. And this does, fortunately or unfortunately, lead us to a slightly darker side of the fashion sort of conversation in France right now, which is that fashion, especially recently, although I'm sure this has been true through history, has been quite politicized in recent years in France, and specifically regarding sort of this desire, this value in France for laïcité, which is the separation of church and state, and this sort of overt secularism that means that we don't wear and are precluded from wearing outward signs of religion in France. And so you've seen things like, in Cannes, the attack on the burkini, people wearing burkinis to the beach, the disallowance of things like headscarves or long skirts in public schools or in government positions. And then most recently, this sort of conversation around the abaya. So I was wondering, do you have any insight into how this policing of fashion and what the significance of using fashion as this almost soapbox for an underlying issue that's really about sort of religion and culture?
I mean, I think it's completely two different things, the expression through fashion and dressing because it's your religious rules and you're abiding by a certain discretion that is, connected to your religion. So they're completely different because you could see someone, like I've had clients that are men and who wear skirts and they, buy like real skirts, whether they're kilt style or other, doesn't matter, they're skirts. And that's fine. And so that's an expression. Now, if they needed to be completely covered in something like a skirt form because of their religion, it's a completely different thing. So it's a really, it's a difficult topic, to be honest with you, because it's so controversial. And, as you know, we have the largest population of Muslims in France, in Western Europe. So it's, there's a lot of people who are abiding by their religion and dressing to the code that is, given to them, that they don't have a choice. It's not their expression, not that they want to dress that way. This is part of who they are and their affiliation. So I think, it's a really difficult. I mean, do I have any insights? I mean, I struggle with asking myself the same questions that a lot of us do, because I don't think that I think they should be free to express themselves and dress according to what they feel comfortable in. And is this pushing the limit in terms of causing a lot of resentment towards the Muslims and alienating them? I mean, there's so many issues that can arise from the way people look. And this isn't just in dressing, it's in so many other ways too. I mean, you could take this to another level. You could take it to people who who stand out among other people who are born and look different, or who are obese, or who are, I ask myself this a lot, and I don't really know what's gonna happen in France in the future as this becomes more of a serious issue, because it is. I mean, the Muslim population is growing, and they should be allowed to present themselves the way they want to, or the way they're told to. It's also not their choice to be completely covered up. It's a religious rule.
If you're enjoying this episode of Navigating the French, you may also be interested in our sister podcast, Romancing in Paris, which delves into love, lust, and so much more in the City of Light. Navigating the French will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Navigating the French. I think if we reel this back a little bit and we sort of think, okay, we have cultural expectations for fashion in some cases, and sometimes they're religious, and sometimes they're values driven, and sometimes they're just based on norms. Do you get the sense that the same norms, for example, that would govern, I don't know, let's say Hillary Clinton being called out for wearing pantsuits all the time, do you get the sense that the French would have the same critical eye towards the way that their people in power would dress? Do you think that there's that desire? I mean, we're sort of policing, I put that in, scare quotes, the way, and sometimes it is actual policing, but policing the way that certain people dress, and potentially doing this as a way to put a spotlight on certain religions, certain populations, certain communities in France. But do you think that on the flip side, when it is not a question necessarily of a religious or cultural value, but when it's just a choice, do you get the sense that the French public would police what people wear? So let's say, like, you know, could you imagine a front page article criticizing the way that Ségolène Royal or Marine Le Pen would have been dressed in the same way as we had with Hillary Clinton?
If these ladies of power were drawing attention to themselves in a deliberate way, I think that it could make headlines. I think they also have a certain responsibility in the public eye to look a certain way. So even though I think, you know, Hillary Clinton, good for her. I love the pantsuit. I mean, I'm a big pant wearer myself, and I think it's super classy and like, hello, you know, we've had, you know, history even dictates the Christian Dior, and there's so many cool Saint Laurent with his different looks that were presented to women and allowed them to wear pants versus skirts. You know, I love that. I mean, I think good for them. When it comes to religion, I think the biggest problem is it's, you know, the way people need to dress in certain religions isolates them, because you see that this person is either a Muslim or some Hasidic Jews you see dressing a different way. So, you know, it really, it separates them. And this is the difficulty because, as you know, religion and politics, not conversations that you want to ever take lightly or just throw into a dinner party necessarily. It's a difficult conversation to have. I think that, especially these days, anything that outlines people's differences, especially in a religious way, is dangerous or can be dangerous, because there's just so much anger and frustration and hatred. And to see somebody that you potentially could be against, or you could think, you know, wow, they're causing problems, or, you know, there's so many difficulties between religions that we won't even get into because it's just a very sad conversation right now, that, you know, that's what it's about. And it's sad because it's not about the people themselves. It's about this group that we are either fearful of or we don't understand. It's really not, it's about understanding and not accepting. And that's something I have a hard time with. And coming from New York, where, you know, any foreigners are pretty much accepted and welcomed, I find that more difficult here in France. You don't have that same, you know, open invitation. I wish we could find a way to sort of come to peace with our differences. And, you know, in life, to me, the more you travel, the more you experience, the more people you meet, the more open-minded you become.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been illuminating. For those listeners who want to get to know you a little better, who want to maybe check out some of your bags, some of your fashion tours, where can people find you?
So you can head over to Instagram, of course, Kasia Dietz. And I have a website of the same name that I'm sharing both my articles that I've written and my bags. So I have all my bag collections with new bags coming soon, by the way. And I'm also, for my tours, you can head to Kasia Dietz Tours for bag painting workshops and fashion tours and vintage tours and all that fun stuff around fashion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll put those links in the show notes. So anybody who wants to learn more about la mode with, you know, the reigning French queen of la mode can check out Kasia on those websites.
Thank you.
This has been Navigating the French. You can find more from me, Emily Monaco, at Emily_in_France on Twitter and Instagram. This podcast is produced by Paris Underground Radio. To listen to other episodes of this podcast or to discover more podcasts like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com. Thanks for listening, and à bientôt.
This episode of Navigating the French was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio.